Tonight, we're diving into one of history's strangest and deadliest fears. For over 500 years, millions of people across Europe believed that cats, especially black ones, were demons in disguise. They thought these furry creatures were sent straight from hell to steal souls, spread disease, and serve witches in their evil spells. This wasn't just silly superstition. This fear was so real, so powerful, that entire communities would gather to burn cats alive in public squares. Families would kill their own pets. Children would throw stones at any cat they saw. And this mass hysteria may have actually helped cause one of the deadliest disasters in human history. So grab something warm to drink, dim the lights, and let me tell you why your ancestors would have run screaming from the fluffy little creature that might be purring on your lap right now. Because what you're about to learn will change how you think about cats, superstition, and the power of fear forever. By the end of tonight's journey, you'll understand why a simple house cat became humanity's most feared enemy. And you'll discover how this ancient terror created consequences that are still affecting us today. Number 1. The Church's influence. Let's start our story in the year 1233. Europe is deep in what we call the Middle Ages. Most people can't read. They live in tiny villages surrounded by dark forests. They work from sunrise to sunset just to survive. And their entire world is controlled by one massive, all-powerful organization, the Catholic Church. The Church doesn't just run Sunday services. It controls education, politics, laws, and even what people are allowed to think. If the Church says something is true, you believe it. If the Church says something is evil, you fear it. And if the Church says something must die, you grab your pitchfork. Now imagine you're a peasant living in this world. You've never traveled more than 10 miles from your home. You've never seen a book. Your knowledge about the world comes from one source, the priest at your local church. And one Sunday morning, this priest climbs into his wooden pulpit and makes a terrifying announcement. He tells you that the Pope himself, Pope Gregory IX, the most holy man on earth, has received a divine message. God has revealed that cats, particularly black cats, are not innocent animals. They are demons. They are servants of Satan. They are walking, purring, meowing agents of pure evil sent to corrupt your soul and drag you to hell. This wasn't just one priest's crazy idea. This came directly from Rome, from a papal decree called Vox in Rama. The Pope declared that devil worshippers were using cats in their rituals. He claimed that Satan himself could take the form of a cat. And he warned that anyone who showed kindness to a cat might be helping the devil. Think about how this would feel. The most powerful religious leader in your world, speaking with the voice of God, just told you that cats are demons. Your neighbor's barn cat? Demon. The stray that visits your kitchen? Demon. The black kitten your daughter has been feeding? A servant of Satan. But why cats? Why did the Church pick these particular animals to demonize? The answer reveals something dark about medieval politics and social control. You see, cats had always been a bit mysterious. They hunt at night when good Christians should be asleep. Their eyes glow in the dark like tiny green flames. They move silently, appearing and disappearing without warning. They're independent, refusing to obey commands like dogs do. And in a world where everything was supposed to have its proper place, cats didn't fit. The Church taught that God created a perfect order. Humans were supposed to rule over animals. Men were supposed to rule over women. The Church was supposed to rule over everyone. But cats didn't follow rules. They came and went as they pleased. They couldn't be controlled or commanded. And this independence made them dangerous symbols. When Pope Gregory IX declared cats to be demonic, he wasn't just talking about animals. He was sending a message about rebellion itself. Cats represented everything the Church feared: independence, mystery, and refusal to submit to authority. By demonizing cats, the Church was really saying that anything that couldn't be controlled was evil. And the people believed it. How could they not? When God's own representative on earth tells you something, you don't ask questions. You don't demand proof. You simply accept it as absolute truth. This papal endorsement turned a simple superstition into official Church doctrine. Suddenly, fearing cats wasn't just normal, it was holy. Killing cats wasn't just acceptable, it was a Christian duty. And anyone who defended cats might be accused of defending Satan himself. The decree spread across Europe like wildfire. Priests read it from their pulpits. Monks copied it by hand and sent it to other monasteries. Within months, millions of people knew that their local cats were actually demons in disguise. But the church's influence went even deeper than fear. It created a complete worldview where cats became symbols of everything evil, unholy, and dangerous. This wasn't just about animals anymore. This was about good versus evil, God versus Satan, order versus chaos. And once that belief took root in people's minds, it would be almost impossible to dig out. Number 2, cats and witches. Now that the church had officially declared cats to be demonic, people needed to understand how these furry demons actually worked. And medieval minds came up with a terrifying answer: witches. Imagine you're still that same medieval peasant. You've just learned that cats are demons. But you see cats every day, walking around your village, seemingly normal. How do you explain this? The answer that made sense to medieval people was that cats weren't working alone. They had human partners. Evil women who had made deals with Satan himself. Witches. Medieval people believed that when a woman sold her soul to the devil, she received a special demonic helper called a familiar. And the most common familiar? A cat. Usually a black cat, because black was the color of night, of darkness, of evil itself. These weren't just pet cats that happened to live with evil women. According to medieval belief, familiar cats were supernatural beings. They could talk to their witch masters using telepathy. They could spy on neighbors and report back what they heard. They could cast spells, spread disease, and even kill people with their evil powers. The relationship between a witch and her cat familiar was supposed to be deeply intimate and disturbing. Medieval people believed that witches would feed their cats with their own blood, creating a bond that went beyond the natural world. The cat would suckle from the witch's body, drinking not just blood but evil power itself. This belief explained so many things that frightened medieval people. Why did some women live alone on the edges of villages? They must be witches with cat familiars. Why did old women sometimes talk to cats as if they were people? They were obviously communicating with demons. Why did certain women seem to know things about herbs and healing? Their cat demons were teaching them dark magic. The midnight connection made everything worse. Medieval people went to bed when the sun went down. There was no electric lighting, so night was truly dark and frightening. When they heard cats yowling and fighting in the darkness, they didn't think about mating seasons or territorial disputes. They imagined witches' Sabbaths, evil rituals where women and their demon cats gathered to worship Satan. Black cats became the ultimate symbol of this terror. If you saw a black cat cross your path, it meant a witch was nearby, using her familiar to spy on you or cast a curse. If a black cat appeared near your house at night, it meant evil forces were targeting your family. If a black cat looked directly at you with its glowing eyes, it was memorizing your face so the witch could curse you later. These beliefs created a vicious cycle of fear. Women who lived alone were automatically suspected of witchcraft. And since cats are naturally drawn to people who feed them, any woman who showed kindness to a stray cat was immediately suspicious. Was she just being kind to an animal, or was she feeding her demonic familiar? The evidence for witchcraft could be as simple as a cat visiting someone's home regularly. Medieval people would watch for signs. Did the cat appear at unusual times? Did it seem unusually intelligent or responsive? Did strange things happen after the cat's visits? Any of these could be proof that the cat was a familiar and its owner was a witch. This paranoia destroyed lives. Women were accused, tried, tortured, and executed based on nothing more than their relationships with cats. Some were burned at the stake while their cats were thrown into the flames beside them. The terror was so intense that many women began killing cats preemptively, hoping to prove their innocence by showing their hatred for these demonic creatures. But the fear went beyond just cats and witches. It created an atmosphere where any unexplained event could be blamed on demonic cats. Did a baby die unexpectedly? A cat familiar must have stolen its breath. Did crops fail mysteriously? Which cats had cursed the fields? Did someone fall ill with a strange disease? They had been hexed by a familiar. Medieval people developed elaborate ways to protect themselves from cat demons. They hung iron horseshoes over doorways because demons couldn't touch iron. They scattered holy water around their homes. They made the sign of the cross whenever they saw a cat. Some even wore special amulets designed to repel familiar spirits. The most terrifying part was that cats, being cats, often behaved in ways that seemed to confirm these fears. Cats are naturally curious, so they would investigate new people and places. This was seen as spying. Cats are crepuscular, most active at dawn and dusk. This was seen as evidence of their supernatural nature. Cats are independent and can't be commanded like dogs. This was seen as proof of their demonic intelligence. Every normal cat behavior became evidence of evil intent. A cat bringing a dead mouse to its owner? The familiar was making an offering to its witch master. A cat purring loudly? It was chanting demonic incantations. A cat hiding during the day and becoming active at night? It was following its demonic nature. This perfect storm of church doctrine, fear of the unknown, and misunderstood animal behavior created a terror that would reshape European society. Cats weren't just animals anymore. They were walking symbols of everything medieval people feared most: the devil, witchcraft, and the terrible power of evil itself. Number 3. Symbolism of the night. To understand why medieval people feared cats so deeply, you need to step into their world after sunset. Imagine living in a time before streetlights, before flashlights, before any artificial lighting at all. When the sun went down, the world transformed into something alien and terrifying. Medieval nights were not like modern nights. There was no gentle glow from windows, no comforting hum of electricity, no sense that civilization continued in the darkness. When night fell, it fell completely. The blackness was so thick you couldn't see your own hand in front of your face. The silence was broken only by howling wind, creaking wood, and mysterious sounds of creatures moving unseen through the darkness. In this world, light meant safety, goodness, and God's protection. Darkness meant danger, evil, and the realm of Satan. The Bible itself taught this division. Jesus was the light of the world. Hell was described as a place of eternal darkness. Angels appeared as beings of brilliant light. Demons lurked in shadows and night. So when medieval people saw cats prowling through this terrifying darkness, moving confidently through a world that humans found impossible to navigate, it seemed supernatural. How could any natural creature see perfectly in complete blackness? How could anything move so silently through the night that even trained watchmen couldn't hear them approaching? But the most frightening thing about cats at night was their eyes. In complete darkness, when everything else disappeared, cat eyes would suddenly appear like floating green flames. Medieval people had no understanding of how animal night vision worked. They didn't know about the reflective layer called the tapetum lucidum that makes cats' eyes glow. All they knew was that in the devil's own darkness, cats' eyes burned like tiny fires from hell. These glowing eyes seemed to prove everything the church had taught them. Demons were often described as having fiery eyes. Satan himself was depicted with blazing red or yellow eyes that could see into men's souls. When people saw cats watching them from the darkness with those gleaming, unblinking stares, it felt like being observed by supernatural intelligence. The silence of cats made everything worse. Dogs bark, alerting everyone to their presence. Horses whinny and stamp their hoofs. Pigs grunt and squeal. But cats move like ghosts. They can walk across creaky wooden floors without making a sound. They can appear beside you without any warning. They can watch you for hours without you knowing they're there. To medieval minds, this silence was unnatural. Good, honest animals made noise. They announced themselves. They followed predictable patterns. But cats seemed to exist outside the natural order. They appeared and disappeared like spirits. They watched and waited like predators studying their prey. The unpredictability of cats terrified people who desperately needed to understand and control their world. Medieval life was harsh and dangerous. People survived by following strict routines, by knowing what to expect, by maintaining order in their small communities. Cats disrupted all of that. You never knew when a cat would appear. You couldn't predict where it would go or what it would do. You couldn't call it to you or command it to leave. Cats follow their own mysterious agenda, ignoring human attempts at control. In a society built on hierarchy, obedience, and submission to authority, cats represented pure rebellion. Medieval people also noticed that cats seemed most active during the hours associated with evil. Dawn and dusk were considered dangerous times when the boundary between the natural and supernatural world was thinnest. These were the hours when demons were strongest, when witches performed their rituals, when evil spirits roamed the earth. And cats? Cats loved these twilight hours. They would emerge from their hiding places just as darkness fell, beginning their nightly hunts. They would prowl through villages and forests during the exact hours when good Christians should be safely indoors, protected by prayer and holy symbols. The way cats moved through darkness seemed to demonstrate supernatural powers. They never stumbled. They never got lost. They navigated complex terrain with perfect confidence, leaping from roof to roof, climbing impossible surfaces, disappearing into spaces that seemed too small to hold them. To medieval observers, this wasn't natural agility. This was demonic ability. Even the sounds cats made at night seemed evil. The yowling of cats fighting or mating was unlike any other animal sound. It was wild, primitive, almost human, but not quite. Medieval people heard these sounds echoing through dark streets and imagined demons communicating, witches calling to their familiars, or souls crying out in torment. Cats' nocturnal hunting behavior also seemed to confirm their evil nature. Medieval people would find dead mice, birds, and other small animals arranged in patterns that seemed deliberate. They didn't understand that cats often bring prey to safe locations or that they might play with dead animals. Instead, they saw these scenes as evidence of ritual sacrifice, miniature altars where demon cats made offerings to their satanic masters. The independence that modern people love about cats was terrifying to medieval minds. Cats didn't need humans the way other domesticated animals did. They could hunt their own food, find their own shelter, and survive without any human help. This self-sufficiency seemed unnatural, even rebellious. In medieval thinking, all creatures were supposed to depend on humans, who in turn depended on God. This was the natural order, the great chain of being that connected all life from the lowest worm to the highest angel. But cats seemed to exist outside this chain. They took what they wanted, ignored what they didn't need, and answered to no authority. This combination of darkness, silence, unpredictability, and independence created the perfect storm of fear. Cats embodied everything medieval people found terrifying about the night itself. They were creatures of shadows, beings that thrived in the realm where evil was strongest and God's protection was weakest. When medieval people looked at cats, they didn't see animals. They saw living symbols of rebellion against divine order, supernatural beings that served the powers of darkness, demons that had infiltrated the daylight world to corrupt and destroy everything good and holy. Number 4. Folklore and legends. Medieval Europe was a world built on stories. In an age when most people couldn't read, when news traveled slowly, when scientific explanations didn't exist for mysterious events, folklore filled the gaps. And the stories people told about cats were absolutely terrifying. These weren't just campfire tales meant to entertain children. These were accepted facts, passed down through generations, told and retold until they became as real as the sunrise. When your grandmother, your priest, and your neighbors all told the same stories about demonic cats, you believed them completely. One of the most widespread legends claimed that cats could transform into other forms, usually old women or hags. Medieval people believed they had witnessed this transformation with their own eyes. A traveler would be walking along a forest path at twilight when an old woman would approach, begging for food or shelter. If the traveler was kind, she would disappear, only to be replaced by a cat that would follow him home. If he was cruel, she would curse him before transforming into a snarling black cat and vanishing into the woods. These shape-shifting stories explained why some cats seemed unusually intelligent or human-like in their behavior. That cat watching you from the corner? It might actually be an old witch studying your weaknesses. The cat that always seems to know when visitors are coming? It's probably a transformed human using supernatural knowledge. People claim they could identify these transformed cats by looking for human characteristics. A cat that walked upright for even a few steps was obviously supernatural. A cat that seemed to understand human speech too, well, was probably a witch in disguise. Any cat that showed unusual intelligence or seemed to make eye contact for too long was suspect. Even more frightening were the stories of cats predicting death. Medieval people believed that cats could see into the spirit world and knew when death was approaching. If a cat that never visited your house suddenly appeared and wouldn't leave, it meant someone in your family would die soon. If a cat howled outside a sick person's window, that person was doomed. If a cat refused to enter a house where it was usually welcome, death was already inside. These death omens were taken so seriously that families would sometimes abandon dying relatives rather than risk the curse that the presence of a death-sensing cat might bring. The sight of a strange cat near home was enough to send entire families into panic, desperately performing rituals to ward off the approaching doom. Local legends varied from region to region, but they all reinforced the same basic fear. In France, people told stories of cats that could speak human languages, but only used this ability to deliver curses or prophecies of doom. In Germany, legends described cats that could become invisible at will, allowing them to spy on humans and report back to their demonic masters. English folklore was particularly rich with cat terror. Stories told of phantom cats as large as dogs that would appear on lonely roads, their eyes glowing like lanterns, leading travelers to their deaths in bogs or off cliffs. These spectral cats were said to be the souls of executed witches, still serving Satan even after death. Italian legends described cats that could steal babies' breath while they slept, suffocating infants to feed on their pure souls. This belief was so strong that cats were banned from nurseries and rooms where children slept. Any unexplained infant death was automatically blamed on a breath-stealing cat, leading to massive cat hunts and killings. Spanish folklore told of cats that could control the weather, summoning storms to destroy crops or calling forth drought to starve communities. If a harvest failed after unusual cat activity in the area, the cats would be hunted down and killed as punishment for their weather magic. One of the most persistent legends claimed that cats could multiply supernaturally. Medieval people believed that killing one demonic cat would cause two more to appear in its place. This explained why cat populations seemed to recover so quickly after organized killings. It wasn't natural reproduction. It was supernatural multiplication powered by satanic magic. These multiplication stories made people even more afraid to kill cats individually. What if your attempt to destroy one demon only made the problem worse? What if you accidentally summoned an entire army of demonic cats? This fear sometimes protected cats, but it also made people more likely to participate in large-scale, organized cat massacres where entire communities worked together to overwhelm the supernatural multiplication effect. Another widespread legend claimed that cats could steal human shadows and souls. People believed that if a cat's shadow crossed yours, or if a cat stared at your shadow for too long, it could literally pull your soul from your body. This soul theft would leave you weak, sick, or eventually dead while the cat carried your spiritual essence back to Satan. Tales also spread about cats that could mimic human voices, calling out in the darkness to lure people to their doom. Travelers reported hearing their names called in familiar voices, only to follow the sound and find nothing but a cat watching them with gleaming eyes. These voice-mimicking cats were said to be learning human speech to better deceive and destroy their victims. Perhaps the most terrifying legends were about cats that served as messengers between the world of the living and the realm of hell. These messenger cats were said to carry the souls of the damned back to Satan, or to bring demonic commands from hell to witches on earth. People claimed they could identify messenger cats because they never seemed to eat, drink, or rest like normal animals. They existed purely to serve their supernatural purpose. The power of these stories lay in their specific, believable details. They weren't vague fairy tales about magical kingdoms far away. They were presented as true events that happened to real people in recognizable places. Your neighbor claimed his aunt had seen a shape-shifting cat. The village priest confirmed that cats had caused the drought 2 summers ago. The traveling merchant swore he had witnessed a cat stealing a baby's breath with his own eyes. These legends created a complete mythology around cats that explained every unusual event, every unexplained death, every moment of bad luck. In a world where people desperately needed explanations for the mysterious and terrifying events in their lives, cats became the perfect supernatural scapegoats. The stories were self-reinforcing. Once people believed cats were demonic, they interpreted every cat behavior through that lens. A cat meowing at night became a demon calling to its master. A cat bringing a dead mouse became a demon making an offering. A cat running away when approached became a demon fleeing from holy presence. This folklore wasn't just entertainment. It was a shared belief system that shaped how entire communities understood their world. And once these stories became deeply embedded in the culture, they would be almost impossible to erase. Number 5. Political and social control. The fear of cats wasn't just about superstition or religious belief. It was also a powerful tool for controlling people. Medieval rulers, both religious and political, quickly realized that the terror surrounding cats could be used to maintain order, punish enemies, and strengthen their own authority. Think about how social control works. People need to believe that their leaders have special knowledge, special power, special connection to divine truth. When a priest or lord claims to understand which cats are demonic and which are not, when they can identify witches by their relationships with cats, When they can perform rituals to protect communities from cat demons, they're demonstrating supernatural authority that goes beyond normal human power. The church especially benefited from cat paranoia. When people were terrified of demonic forces, they desperately needed protection from holy authorities. They paid more money to the church. They attended services more regularly. They confessed their sins more often. They followed church rules more strictly. Fear made them dependent on religious protection. Local priests became incredibly powerful by positioning themselves as experts on identifying and fighting cat demons. They could declare certain cats to be demonic based on any criteria they chose. A cat that wandered near the church, obviously trying to corrupt holy ground. A cat owned by someone who challenged church authority, clearly a familiar spirit. A cat that seemed too well-fed when peasants were starving, suspiciously supernatural. This gave priests enormous power over their communities. They could effectively destroy anyone by declaring their cat to be demonic. Since most households had cats for pest control, almost anyone could be accused. The accusation alone was usually enough to ruin someone's reputation and social standing. Political leaders also used cat fear to control peasant populations. When people were angry about high taxes, failed harvests, or harsh living conditions, rulers could redirect that anger toward cats and the people who owned them. Instead of blaming the Lord for their problems, peasants would blame demons and witches. Instead of organizing against their human oppressors, they would organize against supernatural ones. Scapegoating cats served multiple political purposes. It gave people an outlet for their frustrations that didn't threaten the existing power structure. It created a sense of unity as communities came together to fight a common enemy. It demonstrated the ruler's power and wisdom in protecting their people from demonic threats. The cat terror also provided convenient explanations for government failures. Crops failed because of cat curses, not because of poor agricultural policies. Plagues spread because of demonic cats, not because of unsanitary living conditions. Wars were lost because enemies had more powerful cat familiars, not because of military incompetence. This blame shifting was incredibly effective. Medieval peasants lived difficult, often desperate lives. They needed someone to blame for their suffering, but directly challenging their human rulers was dangerous and potentially hopeless. Cats provided a perfect alternative target. They were mysterious enough to seem genuinely threatening, but powerless enough to be safely attacked. Public cat burnings became important political and religious events. These weren't just executions, they were community celebrations that served multiple purposes. They demonstrated the authorities' power over supernatural forces. They provided entertainment for people who had very few forms of recreation. They created shared experiences that bonded communities together. And they sent clear messages about what happened to anyone associated with forces that challenge established order. The timing of these cat massacres was often politically motivated. They typically occurred during periods of social tension, economic hardship, or political instability. When rulers needed to distract people from their problems or unite them against a common enemy, a good cat burning could work wonders. Leaders also used cat accusations to eliminate specific enemies. Political rivals, religious dissidents, economic competitors, or simply inconvenient individuals could be destroyed by connecting them to demonic cats. The beauty of this system was that the accusations were nearly impossible to disprove. How do you prove that your cat isn't demonic? How do you demonstrate that you're not a witch? The burden of proof fell on the accused, and the evidence required was whatever the accuser decided it should be. Women were particularly vulnerable to cat-based accusations because they were already seen as more susceptible to demonic influence. A woman who lived alone, who knew about herbs and healing, who was too independent or outspoken, could be quickly silenced by accusations of cat familiarity. The system effectively punished any woman who stepped outside traditional gender roles. The economic benefits of cat persecution were also significant. When someone was accused of witchcraft because of their relationship with cats, their property could be confiscated by religious or political authorities. Their land, livestock, household goods, and savings would be redistributed to the accusers or the community leaders. This created strong financial incentives for making accusations and strong disincentives for defending the accused. Merchants and craftsmen could destroy business competitors by spreading rumors about their cats. If a baker's business was too successful, neighbors might claim his cats were familiars helping him with supernatural baking abilities. If a healer was too effective, Rivals could suggest her cats were providing demonic medical knowledge. The cat terror also reinforced gender and class hierarchies. Poor women with cats were automatically suspicious, while wealthy men with the same animals were usually safe from accusation. This double standard maintained existing power structures while appearing to be based on supernatural rather than social criteria. Religious authorities used cat fear to suppress any beliefs or practices that challenged Orthodox Christianity. Folk healers, midwives, herbalists, and other practitioners of traditional knowledge were often portrayed as cat-owning witches. By demonizing both cats and the people associated with them, the church could eliminate alternative sources of wisdom and authority. The systematic persecution of cats and their owners created a climate of fear and suspicion that made it much easier to control large populations. When people were constantly watching each other for signs of demonic influence, when they were reporting on neighbors who showed unusual kindness to cats, when they were participating in community cat hunts, they had little time or energy left for questioning their human rulers. This culture of surveillance and denunciation served the interests of those in power perfectly. It turned communities against themselves, making organized resistance nearly impossible. It created networks of informants and accusers who helped maintain social control. And it provided ready-made explanations for any problems that might otherwise lead to political unrest. The genius of using cats as instruments of social control was that the system seemed to operate automatically. Once the beliefs were established, communities would police themselves. Parents would teach their children to fear cats. Neighbors would watch each other for suspicious cat behavior. Local groups would organize their own cat hunts and burnings. The authorities could maintain control while appearing to simply respond to popular demand for protection from supernatural threats. Number 6. The Great Cat Massacres. What began as religious fear and political manipulation soon exploded into something far more terrible: organized mass murder of cats on a scale that's hard to imagine. Entire communities, cities, and regions participated in systematic campaigns to exterminate every cat they could find. These weren't isolated incidents of cruelty. They were coordinated efforts that lasted for decades and claimed millions of feline lives. The most infamous of these massacres took place in Paris during the late medieval period. Historical records describe events that seem almost impossible to believe, but multiple witnesses documented what they saw. Hundreds of people would gather in public squares, bringing cages full of captured cats. These animals would then be tortured and killed in elaborate public ceremonies that were treated as both religious rituals and popular entertainment. The Parisians built special wooden platforms for these events, designed to display the cat killings to maximum effect. Cats would be placed in wicker baskets and slowly lowered into bonfires while crowds cheered and sang religious hymns. The combination of screaming animals, crackling flames, and celebrating humans created scenes that witnesses described as both hellish and holy. But the burning wasn't quick. Medieval people believed that demons needed to be tortured to force them to reveal their true nature and leave the physical world. So cats were often subjected to prolonged torment before death. They might be hung by their tails, beaten with clubs, or partially burned before being thrown into the flames. The longer and louder a cat screamed, the more convinced people became that they were driving out genuine demons. London had its own version of these massacres, often timed to coincide with religious holidays. On certain feast days, citizens would organize cat hunts that swept through the city like military campaigns. Groups of men and boys would search every alley, basement, and rooftop, capturing any cats they could find. The animals would then be brought to central locations for public execution. These London cat hunts were treated as community celebrations. Families would pack food and gather to watch the killings as if attending a festival. Children were encouraged to participate, throwing stones at caged cats or helping to build the execution fires. The events were seen as educational, teaching young people about the eternal struggle between good and evil. But the organized massacres went far beyond major cities. Small villages throughout Europe held their own cat killings, often competing with neighboring communities to see who could destroy more demons. Rural cat hunts would sweep across entire regions, with participants traveling from town to town in organized campaigns of extermination. These rural massacres were often tied to agricultural seasons. Communities would organize massive cat killings during planting times, convinced that destroying cat demons would protect their crops from supernatural interference. Harvest festivals frequently featured cat burnings as offerings of gratitude for protection from demonic influence during the growing season. The methods of killing became increasingly elaborate and cruel as communities tried to outdo each other in demonstrating their devotion to the fight against evil. Some places developed specialized torture devices designed specifically for cats. Others created elaborate execution rituals that could last for hours, with different phases of torment meant to represent different aspects of spiritual purification. In some regions, cat massacres became annual traditions that continued for generations. Entire families would participate, passing down techniques and beliefs from parents to children. Young men would prove their courage and faith by volunteering to capture cats from dangerous locations. Young women would demonstrate their purity by showing appropriate horror and disgust during the killings. The scale of these massacres was enormous. Historical estimates suggest that millions of cats were killed across Europe during the height of the anti-cat hysteria. Entire regional populations of cats were virtually eliminated. Cities that had once teemed with cats became almost completely feline-free zones. The organized nature of these killings was crucial to their effectiveness. Individual acts of cruelty toward cats had always existed, but the massacres represented something different. Entire communities working together with shared purpose, coordinated planning, and mutual reinforcement of their beliefs and actions. Religious authorities often blessed these massacre events, giving them official sanction and spiritual significance. Priests would open the ceremonies with prayers asking for divine protection during the battle against demonic forces. They would sprinkle holy water on the execution sites and lead crowds in hymns during the killings. Political leaders also endorsed and sometimes organized the massacres. Town councils would issue proclamations calling for community participation in cat extermination. Local nobles would provide funding for execution equipment and rewards for particularly successful cat hunters. Military units would sometimes be assigned to help with large-scale cat capture operations. The massacres created their own momentum. As cats became rarer, the remaining ones seemed even more supernatural and threatening. A single cat surviving in a town where hundreds had been killed must possess incredible demonic power. This logic led to increasingly desperate efforts to find and destroy every last cat. Some communities developed elaborate tracking systems to make sure no cats escaped their purges. Houses would be searched systematically. Rewards would be offered for information about hidden cats. People would be required to report any cat sightings to local authorities. Anyone found concealing a cat could be accused of witchcraft themselves. The massacres also became self-perpetuating through social pressure. In communities where cat killing was seen as a religious and civic duty, anyone who refused to participate became automatically suspect. Why wouldn't someone want help destroy demons? What kind of person would show mercy to agents of Satan? The only safe position was enthusiastic participation in the killings. The economic aspects of the massacres were also significant. Professional cat catchers emerged, making their living by supplying animals for public executions. Special tools and equipment were manufactured for cat capture and killing. Entrepreneurs sold food and souvenirs at massacre events. The destruction of cats became a genuine industry. As the massacres continued year after year, they created cultural traditions that seemed natural and necessary to the people who participated in them. Children grew up believing that annual cat killings were normal parts of community life. Adults who had participated in these events for decades couldn't imagine their towns without them. The psychological effects of participating in organized animal torture were profound but largely unrecognized at the time. Communities that regularly gathered to watch and participate in the systematic torture and killing of living creatures became habituated to violence in ways that affected all aspects of their social relationships. These great cat massacres represented one of history's most successful campaigns of propaganda-driven violence against animals. They demonstrated how quickly fear could transform ordinary people into participants in organized cruelty, how religious and political authority could manipulate popular emotions, and how community traditions could normalize even the most extreme behavior. The massacres also revealed the power of collective action driven by shared beliefs. When entire communities believed they were fighting a supernatural enemy, when their leaders endorsed and encouraged their actions, when their neighbors participated enthusiastically, it became nearly impossible for individuals to resist or question what they were doing. These events would have consequences far beyond the immediate deaths of millions of cats. They were about to trigger an ecological disaster that would reshape European history. Number 7. Consequences of fear. The Great Cat Massacres achieved their goal. By the early 14th century, the cat population across much of Europe had been virtually eliminated. Cities that once hosted thousands of cats now had dozens. Rural areas that had maintained healthy feline populations for centuries were nearly cat-free. The demon hunters had won their war. But victory came with a price that nobody had anticipated. And that price was about to be paid in human blood. You see, cats hadn't just been mysterious night prowlers and supposed agents of Satan. They had also been Europe's primary defense against an army of genuine enemies, rats. And with the cats gone, the rats were about to inherit the earth. Medieval people didn't understand disease transmission. They didn't know about bacteria or viruses. They had no concept of how illness actually spread from one person to another. So when they eliminated cats, they had no idea they were removing the most effective form of pest control that existed in their world. Cats are incredible hunters. A single cat can kill over 1,000 rodents per year. They hunt mice, rats, and other small mammals with deadly efficiency. They're active at night when rodents are most active. They can catch prey in small spaces where humans can't reach. They work constantly, requiring no supervision or training. For centuries, cats had kept European rat populations in check without anyone really noticing or appreciating their contribution. Granaries stayed relatively pest-free because cats hunted around them constantly. Houses remained relatively clean because cats eliminated the mice and rats that would otherwise infest every building. But with the cats gone, rat populations exploded. Without their primary predator, rats began reproducing at incredible rates and spreading into areas where they had never been able to establish large populations before. Granaries became rat cities. Ships became floating rat colonies. Every house, shop, barn, and church became a potential rat breeding ground. The rats brought more than just crop damage and food contamination. They brought fleas. And those fleas carried something that would soon make the cat massacres seem like a minor historical footnote: bubonic plague. The bacterium that causes bubonic plague, Yersinia pestis, lives in the bloodstream of infected rats. Fleas bite these rats, become infected, and then spread the disease when they bite other animals or humans. Under normal circumstances, when cat populations are healthy, this cycle is constantly interrupted. Cats kill infected rats before they can spread the disease widely. Cats kill rats in general, reducing the host population that supports infected fleas. But in post-massacre Europe, there were no cats to interrupt the plague cycle. Rat populations grew enormous, and infected rats lived longer, giving fleas more opportunities to spread the disease. When ships arrived in European ports, they brought not just goods and passengers, but entire colonies of rats and their plague-infected fleas. The irony was devastating. Medieval Europeans had spent decades systematically destroying the animals that could have protected them from the deadliest disease in human history. They had eliminated their natural allies in the name of fighting supernatural enemies that didn't exist. The Black Death arrived in Europe in 1347 and spread with terrifying speed. Within 5 years, it had killed an estimated 75 to 200 million people, between 30 and 60% of Europe's entire population. Entire towns were wiped out. Social and economic systems collapsed. The demographic impact was so severe that it took Europe over 200 years to recover its pre-plague population levels. Modern historians and epidemiologists have identified multiple factors that contributed to the plague's devastating impact, but the absence of cats was clearly significant. Cities and regions that had maintained larger cat populations through the anti-cat hysteria generally suffered less severe plague outbreaks. Areas that had most thoroughly eliminated their cats were often hit hardest by the disease. The connection wasn't lost on everyone at the time. Some medieval observers noted that the plague seemed worse in places where cats had been most completely eliminated. A few voices suggested that maybe cats hadn't been demons after all, but protective spirits sent by God to guard against disease. But for most people, the plague itself seemed like proof that their war against demonic cats hadn't gone far enough. The Black Death was obviously a supernatural punishment, they reasoned, sent because some cats and their witch allies had survived the purges. This led to renewed cat hunts and killings, even as the plague ravaged communities. Some regions that recognized the connection between cats and rat control began secretly protecting surviving cats, but they had to be careful. Publicly defending cats could still result in accusations of witchcraft. So these cat protection efforts were often disguised as other activities or conducted in secret. The plague also created new cat folklore. Some people began claiming that cats could detect plague-infected areas and would flee before the disease arrived, making them useful early warning systems. Others suggested that cats could absorb plague infection and carry it away from human communities, making them protective sacrifices rather than demonic threats. But the damage was done. The Great Cat Massacres had eliminated Europe's primary defense against the rodent populations that carried plague. The result was one of the deadliest pandemics in human history, a demographic catastrophe that reshaped European civilization. The irony extended beyond just the plague. With cats gone, rats and mice destroyed stored grain, contaminated food supplies, and spread other diseases. Agricultural productivity declined as rodent damage increased. Food security became a constant problem in many areas. The economic costs were enormous. Communities had to develop alternative methods of pest control that were far less effective than cats had been. They tried poison, but it was expensive and dangerous to humans. They used traps, but these required constant maintenance and were only moderately effective. They employed human rat catchers, but these are costly and couldn't match the hunting ability of cats. Some communities tried to replace cats with other predators. They encouraged hawks and owls, but these birds couldn't hunt in the same spaces cats had covered and weren't active at the same times. They tried using dogs, but dogs weren't nearly as effective at catching small, quick prey. The ecological disruption went beyond just rats. With cats eliminated, other small mammal populations also exploded. Rabbits damaged crops. Mice infested houses. Various rodent species began competing with humans for food resources in ways that hadn't been problematic when cat populations were healthy. The psychological impact was also significant. Communities that had participated enthusiastically in cat massacres now faced the consequences of their actions. Some people began to wonder if they had made a terrible mistake. Others doubled down on their beliefs, insisting that the problems they were experiencing were further evidence of demonic influence that required even more aggressive supernatural warfare. The cat massacres had also eliminated much of the knowledge about living and working with cats. Generations of people grew up without understanding how to care for cats, how to encourage them to hunt in specific areas, or how to maintain healthy cat populations. Even when communities wanted to reintroduce cats, they often lacked the practical knowledge to do so effectively. The consequences of the Great Cat Massacres extended far beyond the immediate animal deaths. They represented a massive ecological experiment that went catastrophically wrong. They demonstrated how superstition and fear could lead to environmental destruction with consequences that lasted for centuries. By the time the plague began to recede, Europe had learned a harsh lesson about the interconnectedness of all living things. The cats they had destroyed as demons had actually been guardians. The supernatural war they had fought had been against imaginary enemies while real threats multiplied in the shadows. The Great Cat Massacres had succeeded in their stated goal of eliminating demonic cats from European communities. But in doing so, they had unleashed something far more deadly than any supernatural threat could have been. Number 8. The shift in beliefs. By the late 15th century, something remarkable was beginning to happen across Europe. After centuries of fearing and killing cats, people were starting to change their minds. The shift wasn't sudden or dramatic, but it was unmistakable. Slowly, quietly, cats were beginning their journey from demons back to domestic companions. Several forces came together to create this transformation. The Renaissance brought new ways of thinking about the natural world. The printing press spread books that challenged old superstitions. Direct experience with rat problems made people reconsider the value of cats. And perhaps most importantly, the horror of the plague made communities desperate for any protection they could find. The Renaissance spirit of inquiry encouraged people to question beliefs that had been accepted for generations. Scholars began studying the natural world more carefully, observing animal behavior rather than just accepting religious authorities' pronouncements about what animals represented. These early natural philosophers noticed that cats seemed to follow predictable patterns, not supernatural commands. Italian Renaissance thinkers were among the first to publicly suggest that cats might be beneficial rather than demonic. They observed that cats killed rats and mice that damaged books in libraries and ate grain in storage areas. They noted that cats seemed to prefer hunting these pest species rather than attacking humans or their property. The invention of the printing press in the mid-15th century was crucial to changing attitudes about cats. For the first time, alternative viewpoints could be spread widely and quickly. Books began appearing that described cats as useful animals rather than supernatural threats. These texts reached people who had never heard anyone question the demonic cat narrative. Some of these books included practical information about cat care and training. They explained how to encourage cats to hunt in specific areas, how to provide proper food and shelter to maintain healthy cat populations, and how to breed cats for particular characteristics. This practical knowledge made cats seem like tools that could be managed and controlled rather than mysterious forces beyond human understanding. The economic argument for cats became increasingly compelling. Merchants who traded in grain, cloth, and other materials that rats could damage began to realize that cats could protect their investments more effectively than any other method available. Some trading companies began keeping cats specifically to guard their warehouses and ships. Ship owners were among the earliest converts to the new pro-cat thinking. Rats could destroy cargo, contaminate food supplies, and even damage wooden ships by gnawing through important structures. Cats could patrol ships constantly, catching rats in spaces too small for human rat catchers to reach. The maritime industry began actively seeking cats for their vessels. This practical revaluation of cats happened gradually and unevenly. Urban merchants and scholars were more likely to embrace the new thinking than rural peasants. Northern European countries generally shifted faster than southern ones. Areas that had suffered severe rat problems were quicker to welcome cats back than regions that had maintained better pest control through other means. The Catholic Church's position on cats also began to evolve, though slowly and with considerable internal debate. Some church scholars argued that if God had created cats, they must serve some divine purpose. Others suggested that cats' hunting abilities were gifts meant to help humans maintain dominion over creation as described in the Bible. A few progressive priests began preaching that cats were creatures of God like any others, and that the earlier demonization had been based on misunderstanding rather than divine revelation. These religious voices provided important cover for people who wanted to keep cats but feared accusations of heresy or witchcraft. The shift in beliefs was also helped by practical necessity. Communities devastated by plague and rat damage were willing to try anything that might help. Even people who still had some fear of cats were often desperate enough to accept them if they could reduce rodent problems. Some regions developed compromise positions that allowed for cat ownership while maintaining spiritual protection. Cats could be kept, but they had to be blessed by priests. Black cats might still be forbidden, but other colors were acceptable. Cats could hunt rats, but they couldn't be treated as pets or allowed inside houses. These transitional beliefs helped bridge the gap between the old fear-based attitudes and the new practical acceptance. They allowed communities to benefit from cats' hunting abilities while maintaining their religious and cultural comfort zones. The Renaissance also brought new artistic representations of cats. Instead of being depicted as demons or symbols of evil, cats began appearing in paintings and literature as ordinary animals or even as symbols of domestic comfort and prosperity. These cultural representations helped normalize cats in ways that direct arguments might not have achieved. Wealthy families began keeping cats as status symbols, demonstrating their sophistication and connection to Renaissance learning. If noble and educated people could safely own cats, then perhaps the supernatural fears had been exaggerated. This social modeling effect was particularly important in societies where fashion and behavior flowed from upper to lower classes. The scientific revolution that emerged from Renaissance thinking also contributed to changing attitudes about cats. Early scientists began studying animal behavior systematically, developing more accurate understanding of how cats actually lived and hunted. These studies gradually replaced supernatural explanations with natural ones. Medical knowledge was also advancing. Doctors began to understand that disease spread through natural, rather than supernatural means. The connection between rats and plague became clearer, which made the value of cats as rat controllers more obvious to educated people. International trade also played a role. Merchants traveling to other parts of the world discovered cultures where cats were valued and respected. They saw that societies with healthy cat populations often had fewer pest problems and better food security. These observations challenged European assumptions about cats being uniquely demonic. The Protestant Reformation, beginning in the early 16th century, also affected attitudes toward cats. Protestant reformers rejected many Catholic traditions and superstitions, including some of the beliefs about demonic cats. In Protestant regions, cats often recovered faster than in areas that remained Catholic. But the shift wasn't complete or universal. Many people maintained traditional fears about cats well into the 17th and 18th centuries. Rural areas were often slower to change than cities. Older generations maintained their suspicions even when younger people accepted cats. And some regions experienced periodic reversals when local crises revived old superstitions. The process of rehabilitation was also complicated by the practical challenges of rebuilding cat populations that had been nearly eliminated. There weren't enough cats available to meet the demand in many areas. The surviving cats were often feral and difficult to domesticate, and people had lost much of the traditional knowledge about how to live and work with cats. Some communities had to import cats from regions that had maintained healthier populations. These imported cats were expensive and didn't always adapt well to new environments. Breeding programs had to be developed to increase cat numbers, but this took years to show significant results. The shift in beliefs about cats represented a broader change in how people thought about the natural world. The Renaissance emphasis on observation and experimentation gradually replaced medieval reliance on authority and tradition. People began to judge animals by their actual behavior rather than their symbolic meaning. This transformation wasn't just about cats. It was part of a larger movement toward rational, scientific thinking that would eventually challenge many medieval superstitions and beliefs. Cats became one of the first beneficiaries of this new way of understanding the world. By the late Renaissance, cats had begun their journey from demons back to domestic companions. They weren't fully rehabilitated yet, and many people remained suspicious of them, but the worst of the persecution was over. The age of the great cat massacres had ended, replaced by a more practical and tolerant approach to these remarkable animals. So here we are, at the end of our journey through one of history's strangest and most tragic episodes of mass hysteria. We've seen how an entire civilization turned against one of nature's most effective pest controllers, how religious and political leaders manipulated fear for their own purposes, and how superstition created consequences that lasted for centuries. Think about what we've learned tonight. For over 500 years, millions of people across Europe genuinely believed that cats were demons sent from hell to steal souls and serve witches. This wasn't just a few crazy individuals. This was a shared belief system that shaped laws, influenced politics, guided religious doctrine, and justified organized campaigns of animal torture and murder. The Great Cat Massacres eliminated millions of animals and nearly drove entire regional populations to extinction. The ecological consequences were catastrophic. Without cats to control rodent populations, rats multiplied exponentially and helped spread the Black Death, one of the deadliest pandemics in human history. But here's the question that should haunt us. What if cats had never been demonized? What if medieval Europe had maintained healthy cat populations instead of systematically destroying them? Would the Black Death have spread so far and killed so many people if cats had been there to control the rats that carried plague-infected fleas? Would 75 to 200 million people have died if Europe's natural pest control system had remained intact? Would the demographic catastrophe that reshaped European civilization have been prevented by simply leaving cats alone? We'll never know for certain, but the evidence suggests that the answer is probably yes. The Great Cat Massacres may have been one of the deadliest mistakes in human history, a self-inflicted wound that cost more lives than most wars. The story of cats and demons reveals something disturbing about human nature. It shows how easily fear can override reason, how quickly superstition can become accepted truth, and how dangerous it can be when political and religious authorities manipulate popular emotions for their own purposes. But it also reveals something hopeful. Eventually, people did change their minds. Gradually, through direct experience and rational observation, Europeans realized they had made a terrible mistake. Cats were slowly rehabilitated from demons to domestic companions. Science and reason eventually triumphed over superstition and fear. This transformation didn't happen quickly or easily. It took centuries for cats to fully recover from their demonization. Even today, some superstitions about cats persist. Black cats are still considered unlucky in many cultures. Cats are still associated with witchcraft in popular culture. The shadows of medieval fear still linger in our collective unconscious. The contrast between medieval and modern attitudes toward cats is striking. Look at medieval art depicting cats as symbols of evil, corruption, and supernatural threat. Then look at modern cats sleeping peacefully in sunny windows, playing with toys, purring in their owners' laps. The transformation is remarkable. Today, cats are among the most popular pets in the world. Millions of people share their homes with cats and consider them beloved family members. We understand that cats are intelligent, independent animals with complex social behaviors and individual personalities. We appreciate their hunting abilities, their companionship, and their unique contribution to human households. But the lesson of the great cat massacres extends far beyond cats themselves. It's a warning about the dangers of mass hysteria, the power of propaganda, and the consequences of turning fear into policy. It reminds us to question authority, to think critically about popular beliefs, and to consider the unintended consequences of our actions. Throughout history, humans have repeatedly identified scapegoats to blame for their problems. We've targeted people who look different, believe different things, or live different lifestyles. We've created enemies out of the unfamiliar and the misunderstood. The story of cats and demons is just one example of this destructive pattern. The medieval persecution of cats teaches us to be suspicious of any narrative that presents complex problems as simple battles between good and evil. Real life is more complicated than that. Real solutions require careful thought, not emotional reactions. It also teaches us about the interconnectedness of all living things. The elimination of cats had consequences that medieval people never anticipated because they didn't understand ecological relationships. Today, as we face environmental challenges that require us to think carefully about how human actions affect natural systems, this lesson is more relevant than ever. The story of cats and demons is ultimately a story about fear and how it can be manipulated to create tragedy. But it's also a story about the possibility of change, the power of reason, and the resilience of both animals and humans in the face of persecution. Next time you see a cat, remember this history. Remember that this ordinary animal was once considered one of humanity's greatest supernatural threats. Remember the millions of cats that died because of human fear and ignorance. Remember the millions of humans who died because those cats weren't there to protect them. And remember that the same capacity for fear, superstition, and mass hysteria that created the great cat massacres still exists in human nature today. We're not immune to these dangers just because we live in a more scientific age. The tools have changed, but the underlying psychology remains the same. The lesson of the cats and demons isn't just about medieval history. It's about us. It's about the choices we make when we're afraid, the leaders we follow when we're desperate, and the consequences we create when we let fear override reason. But speaking of animals accused of serving the devil, cats weren't the only creatures that medieval people put on trial for supernatural crimes. Next time, we'll explore an even stranger chapter in this dark history. We'll discover how entire communities gathered to formally prosecute pigs, goats, and other farm animals for witchcraft and demonism. We'll see how animals were actually brought before judges, assigned lawyers, and executed according to legal procedures that seem impossible to believe. You think the story of demonic cats was strange? Wait until you hear about the time a pig was sentenced to death for murder, when a rooster was burned at the stake for laying an egg, and when an entire herd of cattle was excommunicated from the church for destroying a holy shrine. The medieval mind created a world where animals could be criminals, where supernatural law applied to natural creatures, and where the boundary between human and animal justice completely disappeared. These animal trials reveal even more about medieval fear, superstition, and the lengths people would go to impose order on a chaotic world. So if tonight's journey into the world of demonic cats has left you questioning what other strange beliefs our ancestors held, you won't want to miss our next exploration into the courtrooms where animals faced judges and juries for crimes that defied logic, reason, and everything we think we know about justice. Until then, the next time you hear a cat meow in the darkness, remember that you're listening to a sound that once struck terror into human hearts, a voice that was once believed to speak for Satan himself. And be grateful that we live in an age where a cat's meow is more likely to mean feed me than your soul belongs to hell. The great cat massacre is over. The demons have been revealed as house pets. But the lessons of this dark chapter in human history continue to echo through time, reminding us that fear and superstition are always lurking in the shadows, waiting for their chance to turn neighbors against each other and communities against themselves. The cats survived. The question is, have we learned enough from their story to ensure that we never repeat these same mistakes again?